You wake up, look in the mirror, and for a split second, you don't recognize the person staring back at you. It's your face, your body, but something feels off, like you're looking at a stranger wearing your skin. You go through your morning routine, shower, coffee, getting dressed for work, and with each action, you feel yourself disappearing. A little more, putting on clothes that someone else chose. A professional version of you that isn't quite you, responding to messages in a tone that sounds right, but feels hollow, smiling at people you don't really know, saying "I'm fine" when something inside is quietly screaming. And here's the disturbing part. This isn't unusual. This isn't a breakdown. This is Tuesday. This is your life. And you can't remember when it started to feel this way. When did you stop being yourself and start being the person everyone expected you to be? When did your authentic desires get replaced by should and must and have to? When did living become performing? And why does no one else seem to notice or care that we're all walking around in costumes, pretending to be someone we're not? Sarah knew this feeling intimately. She was 29 years old, worked in course communications, had a nice apartment, a reliable boyfriend, a respectable career trajectory. On paper, her life looked perfect. Her Instagram feed showed a woman who had it all together, professional, polished living, her best life, but inside she felt like a fraud, like she was playing a character in someone else's movie, following a script she never agreed to. And the worst part was that she was good at it. So good that everyone believed the performance, so good that sometimes even she believed it. Until those moments of recognition in the mirror, or lying awake at 3 a.m. when the mask would slip and she would feel the terrifying emptiness underneath. Who am I really? She would wonder. And the answer would come back in silence. Because beneath all the roles and expectations and performances, there was just a void. A space where a self should be, but had been gradually hollowed out by years of being she was supposed to be, instead of who she was. This is what philosophers call the crisis of authenticity. And it's not just Sarah's problem, it's the defining crisis of modern existence. We've become so skilled at performing identity that we've forgotten how to be ourselves. We've optimized our persona for social approval until there's nothing authentic left. We've curated our lives so carefully that we've edited out the actual person living. Think about the major decisions in your life. Your career path, your relationship status, where you live, how you spend your time. How many of those decisions were actually yours? And how many were inherited, absorbed from family expectations, cultural narratives, social pressure? What success should look like? Sarah started tracing this back. One evening she made a list of her life choices. Went to university, because that's what smart kids do. Chose business degree, because it's practical, has good job prospects. Took the corporate job because it pays well, plus benefits, provides stability, is what responsible adults do. Stayed in the relationship because we've been together 3 years, and he's a good guy, and I'm 29, and isn't this what I'm supposed to want by now? Bought the apartment, because that's what successful people do. Owns property, builds equity, is adulting properly. Each decision made sense individually. Each one was rational, justifiable, the right choice by conventional standards. But looking at the list as a whole, she realized something disturbing. None of these decisions came from her actual desires, her genuine interests, her authentic self. They all came from an internalized script about what a successful, valuable, worthy person does. She had spent her entire adult life checking boxes on someone else's list. And the person who wrote that list was never her. It was a composite of parental expectations, educational programming, cultural messaging, social media influence, relationship pressure, and she had so thoroughly internalized this external script that she couldn't tell anymore where their voice ended and hers began. This is what psychologists call introjection, the process by which external expectations become internal voices, until you can't distinguish between what you actually want and what you've been programmed to want. And here's what makes this so psychologically damaging. When you live according to introjected values, when you make life choices based on someone else's script, you're not wrong. Exactly, the choices might even be good choices, but they're not yours. And living a life that isn't yours, even a successful one, creates a profound existential dissonance. A feeling that something fundamental is wrong, even when everything looks right. Sarah found herself Googling things like, why do I feel empty despite having everything? And quarter-life crisis. Is this normal? And how to find yourself when you don't know who you are. And the search results were filled with thousands of people asking the same questions. All of us living scripted lives, wondering why the script doesn't feel like. Here's what no one tells you about living a performative life. It's exhausting, not physically exhausting, like running a marathon, but psychologically exhausting, like running a marathon, while also pretending you're not running, while smiling and looking effortless and making it seem like this is exactly where you want to be. Sarah started noticing the exhaustion in small ways. She would come home from work and collapse, not because the work itself was particularly demanding, but because maintaining the professional persona for 9 hours required constant energy, constant vigilance, performance. She had to remember to speak in the right tone, use the right language, show the right level of enthusiasm, display appropriate emotional responses to things she didn't actually care about, and then she'd meet her boyfriend and have to switch personas, become relationship Sarah, who was supportive and interested and emotionally available, even when she felt nothing. Then she'd call her parents, and become daughter Sarah, who was doing great and making good choices, and definitely not having an existential crisis. Then she'd post on Instagram and become curated Sarah, whose life is enviable and aesthetically pleasing and full of meaningful moments that look meaningful but feel empty. By the end of the day, she had performed so many versions of herself that she couldn't remember who she actually was beneath all the performances. And this is the cruel paradox of perform identity. The better you are at it, the more trapped you become, because everyone now expects you to maintain that performance. Your professional success depends on maintaining professional Sarah. Your relationship depends on maintaining girlfriend Sarah. Your family harmony depends on your daughter Sarah. Your social image depends on maintaining Instagram Sarah. To drop any of these performances would be to let people down, to fail to meet expectations, to reveal that you've been faking it this whole time, so you keep performing. And the performance becomes your prison. And here's the psychological mechanism behind this. What starts as conscious performance gradually becomes unconscious habit. You wear the mask so long it fuses to your face. You play the role so consistently, it becomes who you think you are, until one day you wake up and realize you don't know how to take the mask off anymore. You don't remember what your face looks like without it. And this is when the real crisis begins, because you can't go back to unconscious performance once you've seen it, but you also don't know how to stop. Sarah's breaking point came unexpectedly, not dramatically. She was at a team building event, one of those corporate mandatory fun situations where everyone pretends to be enjoying trust falls and icebreaker games. Her manager asked everyone to share something authentic about themselves outside of work. Your real passion, your authentic self. They used those exact words, and Sarah opened her mouth to answer and realized she had absolutely nothing to say. She didn't know what her real passion was. She didn't know what her authentic self wanted because she had spent so long being what others needed. She had no idea what she needed. She stood there silent, while colleagues shared their hobbies, their dreams, their interests, and she felt completely empty. Not sad, not anxious, just empty, like a shell where a person should be. She excused herself, went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and had a moment of devastating recognition. I don't exist, she thought not. I'm depressed, or I'm unhappy, but I don't exist. There is no authentic self under all these performances, just more performances. All the way down, this is what existential philosophers call the encounter with nothingness. The moment when you realize your entire identity is constructed, artificial, a house of cards, with no foundation. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes transparent. You can see yourself performing, can see others performing, can see the whole social world as an elaborate theater, where everyone is pretending, and everyone knows everyone is pretending. But we all agree not to talk about it. And this recognition is terrifying, because if you're not your job, not your relationship status, not your achievements, not your social image, not your curated online presence, not any of the roles you play, then what are you? And here's where most people panic and try to rebuild the old structure faster. They throw themselves into work, into relationships, into new goals, into self-improvement. Anything to avoid sitting with that emptiness, anything to recreate the comforting illusion of a solid identity. Sarah didn't do that. Instead, she did something that felt dangerous. She stopped and she let herself feel the emptiness, not as a problem to solve, but as information, as a message from a part of herself she had been ignoring for years. When Sarah stopped running from the emptiness, she started asking different questions. Not who should I be, but who was I before I learned to perform? Not what do I want to achieve, but what do I actually enjoy when no one is watching? Not what looks good, but what feels true. And this led her to do something strange. She started excavating her own past, looking for clues from moments before the performance became total. She remembered being 7 years old, spending hours drawing elaborate imaginary worlds, not because anyone praised her for it, not because it would lead to anything, just because the self was absorbing. She remembered being 13 and reading philosophy books she didn't fully understand because something in them resonated with questions she had about existence. She remembered being 16 and feeling most alive during late-night conversations with her best friend about everything, nothing, not performing, just being. She remembered being 19 and feeling genuinely excited about studying literature before someone convinced her it wasn't practical. And she switched to business. These weren't big dramatic memories, but they were real. They were moments when she existed with performing, when she was engaged without calculating, when she was herself, without trying to be anyone. And here's what she realized: that authentic self hadn't disappeared. It had just been buried so deep under layers of social conditioning and performance that she couldn't access it anymore. But it was still there, dormant, waiting, not fully formed, because authentic self is never fully formed. It's always becoming, but real in a way her performed self never was. Psychologists call this the true self versus false self distinction. The true self is what naturally emerges when you're not trying to do anything. When you're engaged with something for its own sake. When you're responding genuinely rather than strategically. The false self is the adaptive mask. The socially constructed identity that protects you and helps you function, but at the cost of authenticity. And here's the crucial insight. Most people never realize they have a true self, because the false self is so dominant, so rewarded by society, so integrated into their identity that they think it's all they are. But the true self is always there, always sending signals in the form of boredom. When you're doing something that doesn't align, in the form of aliveness. When you're doing something that does, in the form of emptiness. When the false self dominates completely, the archaeology of self is painful, because you have to dig through layers of should and must, and supposed to. You have to acknowledge how much of your life has been built on someone else's foundation. But it's also liberating, because you finally find something real, something that's actually. When Sarah started making small changes to align with her true self, rather than her performed self, something unexpected happened. People got uncomfortable. She stopped forcing enthusiasm at work, meetings, when she genuinely wasn't enthusiastic. Her manager asked if everything was okay, seemed disengaged, suggested maybe she wasn't a team player anymore. She stopped pretending to enjoy social events she found draining her friends, complained that she'd changed, that she was being weird, that she should just relax and have fun like before. She told her boyfriend she needed space to figure some things out, and he responded with confusion, then frustration, then the implication that she was being selfish, having a quarter-life crisis, overthinking everything. And she realized something disturbing. The people in her life didn't actually want her authentic self. They wanted the performed version, the version that was predictable, pleasant, agreeable, easy to be around, the version that fulfilled her role in their lives without complication. This is the social cost of authenticity. The moment you stop performing to meet others' expectations, they experience it as betrayal. Not because you're doing anything to them, but because you're disrupting the social contract you had implicitly agreed to by performing all this time. And here's what makes this psychologically complex. Their discomfort is real. Their sense of loss is genuine, because they had a relationship with your performed self. Now that self is dying, and from their perspective, you're taking away someone they cared about, even though that someone was never actually you. This is why authenticity requires courage. Not poetic, metaphorical courage, but actual courage. To disappoint people, to be misunderstood, to be judged, to lose relationships that were only sustainable because you were performing, to face the possibility that some people only loved your mask and will not love your face. Sarah lost friends during this period. Not through conflict, just through gradual drift. As she stopped being the person they expected her to be, her relationship ended. Not dramatically, but because her boyfriend realized he'd fallen in love with professional, well-adjusted Sarah, and didn't know what to do with this new, uncertain, questioning version. Some family members worried, asked if she was okay, suggested maybe she should see someone, implying that questioning your life was a symptom of illness rather than health. And this is the gaslighting that happens when you start becoming authentic. The world tells you you're the problem, not the false self you are maintaining, but the authentic self you're becoming. They call it selfish. You set boundaries, call it a phase. When you question your path, call it overthinking. When you examine your life and the message is clear, go back to performing. Go back to being who we needed you to be. Stop making everyone uncomfortable with your authenticity. But going back wasn't an option anymore, because once you see the performance, you can't unsee it. Once you taste authenticity, even in small doses, you can't return to total inauthenticity. The only path is forward, even if it's low. There's a phase in the transition from false self to true self that no one warns you about, a period where you've dismantled your old identity, but haven't yet formed a new one, where you've stopped performing, but don't yet know how to be, where you've rejected who you were supposed to be, but have discovered who you actually are. Psychologists call this liminality, the threshold space between one identity and another, and it's profoundly uncomfortable, because humans need identity, need a sense of self, need to answer the question, who am I with something? And when that answer is, I don't know anymore, you feel like you're free falling. Sarah entered this liminal space, and it was disorienting. She would wake up and not know what she wanted to do, not in an excited infinite possibility way, but in a genuinely don't know way. Her usual compass had been, what should I do? And now that she rejected should as a guide, she had no compass at all. People would ask her questions. What do you want to eat? What do you want to do this weekend? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And she couldn't answer, not because she was being difficult, but because she genuinely didn't know that her full self always had answers, because it was following a script, but the emerging authentic self had no script, and without a script, she felt lost. And here's what makes this phase so psychologically challenging. Society doesn't have patience for not knowing. We're supposed to have goals, have plans, have clear sense of direction and purpose. The liminal space of I'm figuring it out looks like failure, looks like being lost, looks like having your life together and then losing it. And in a way, that's exactly what it is. You are losing it. You're losing the constructed identity that gave you a sense of stability and coherence, and you haven't yet gained the authentic identity that will replace it. So you exist in the gap, and the gap is terrifying, but also sacred, because it's only in this gap that real transformation can happen. You can't become something new while clinging to something old. You can discover your authentic self while still performing a false self. There has to be a death before there can be a rebirth. And the liminal space is that death. It's the dissolution, the emptiness, the not knowing, and every impulse will tell you to fill this void quickly. Rebuild an identity, any identity, just so you're not floating in this uncomfortable uncertainty. But Sarah learned that the void had wisdom, that the not knowing was actually a knowing of a different kind, that the emptiness was really spaciousness. And if she could tolerate it without rushing to fill it, something authentic finally emerged, not constructed, not performed, not borrowed, but the return to authentic self doesn't happen suddenly. There's no moment of dramatic revelation where you finally discover who you really are. Instead, it happens through small acts of authenticity accumulated over time. Choosing what you actually want instead of what you should want. Saying what you actually think instead of what sounds right. Doing what genuinely interests you instead of what looks impressive. Sarah started practicing this in small ways. When someone asked where she wanted to eat, she paused and checked in with her actual body. What did she actually feel like eating? Not sounded healthy or sophisticated, but what she genuinely wanted, and she would say that even if it was simple or unglamorous. When colleagues asked her to social events, she stopped automatically saying yes to be nice, and started actually considering, do I want to go? Would I enjoy this? Or am I just agreeing out of obligation? And if the answer was obligation, she started saying, No without elaborate justifications. Just no thank you. I won't be able to make it. When she found herself bored by something that should interest her, she stopped pretending to be engaged, stopped performing fascination, just acknowledged the boredom. These seem like trivial choices. What to eat, whether to attend a party, admitting when you're bored. But each one was a small act of honoring her authentic experience over her performed response. And cumulatively, these small acts started to reveal a pattern, a shape, emerging sense of who she actually was. She noticed she felt most alive during deep conversations about ideas, most engaged when reading philosophy and psychology, most herself when she was writing, reflecting, questioning. She noticed she genuinely enjoyed solitude, found restoration in silence, energized by learning rather than socializing. She noticed she had actual values, not values she thought she should have, but values that felt true. Honesty over politeness, depth over breadth, meaning over success, authenticity over approval. And here's what changed. She stopped asking, what should I be? Started noticing what I am. Stopped trying to construct an identity and started discovering the identity that was already emerging. Stopped performing who she thought she should be and started being who she couldn't help but be. And paradoxically, by giving up the effort to be someone, the effort maintain an identity, the constant work of performance, she became more distinctly herself than she'd ever been. Because authentic self isn't something you decide, it's something you notice. It's not constructed, it's revealed. It doesn't come from choosing who you want to be. It comes from seeing who you already are beneath all the layers of should and supposed to. This doesn't mean she had all the answers about her future or her path or her purpose, but she had something more fundamental, a sense of her own authentic experience, a connection to her actual preferences and values, a relationship with herself that was real, and that was enough for now. 6 months after her crisis point, Sarah's life looked very different from the outside. She had left her corporate job, taken the significant pay cut to work for a small non-profit focused on literacy and education, started therapy to process the years of performing and disconnection, relationship, amicably recognizing it was built on compatibility of performed selves, not authentic selves. Moved to a smaller apartment, reduced her expenses, simplified her life, reduced her social circle to a few deep friendships instead of many surface connections, stopped posting on Instagram, entirely deleted the performance platform. People who knew her before said she'd thrown her life away, had a quarter-life crisis, made impulsive decisions, would regret all of this. Her parents worried openly, said she'd been doing so well, asked what went wrong, suggested she was depressed and needed help. Her old colleagues thought she'd burned out, had a breakdown, couldn't handle the pressure. But Sarah knew something they couldn't see. She hadn't lost her life. She'd found it for the first time. She was living according to her values, instead of inherited ones, doing work that felt meaningful, instead of just remunerative, having relationships based on authenticity, instead of performance, spending time on what genuinely mattered to her, instead of what looked good. And yes, her life was less impressive on paper, less professionally successful, less socially enviable, less externally validated. Hers, and that made all the difference. She still struggled with uncertainty, still had moments of doubt, still sometimes missed the clarity of the old script, the simplicity of just following expectations. But she never wanted to go back, because she'd experienced something that most people never experience. The feeling of being yourself completely, without performance, without pretense, without the exhausting maintenance of a false identity. Just being in that feeling once you've experienced it becomes more valuable than any external success, any social approval, any measure of achievement requires you to abandon yourself. Here's the truth that no one wants to hear about authenticity. It's not a destination you reach. It's a practice you maintain. It's not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's something you choose every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes every moment, because the forces that create your false self, the social pressure, the fear of judgment, the desire for approval, the need to fit in, those forces don't disappear just because you've done the work of discovering your authentic self. They're still there, still pulling you back toward performance, toward should, toward the comfortable predictability of playing a role. Sarah found this out when she started her new job, even in an environment aligned with her values, even doing work she genuinely cared about. She would catch herself performing, catch herself saying what sounded right instead of what was true, catch herself modulate her personality to be more palatable, more professional, more what she thought they wanted, and she'd have to pause, breathe, reconnect with herself, and choose authenticity again. It was never once and done. It was a continuous practice, a continuous choosing, a continuous returning to self. And she learned the goal isn't to never perform. We all need social selves, need to adapt to contexts, need to function in society. The goal is to know the difference, to be aware when you're performing and when you're being, to have a strong enough connection to your authentic self that you can access it when it matters, to not lose yourself completely in the performance, and most importantly, to build a life that requires less performance, that aligns enough with your authentic values, that you can be mostly yourself, most of the time, not perfectly, not completely, but mostly, and that's enough. This video isn't telling you to quit your job, end your relationships, and completely reinvent your life. Sometimes that's necessary, but often it's not. Sometimes the path is subtler, more gradual, small shifts toward authenticity, accumulated over time. What this video is asking you to do is much more challenging. It's asking you to stop and look honestly at your life, and ask the questions you've been avoiding. Am I living my life, or someone else's idea of my life? Do I know who I am beneath all the roles and performances? If I stripped away everything I do to meet expectations, what would be left? And if the answer to that last question is I don't know, then perhaps it's time to find out. Not someday, not after you achieve one more thing, not when circumstances are perfect, but now, because every day you postpone this reckoning is another day you live as someone you're not, another day you sacrifice your authentic self on the altar of others' expectations, another day you let the real you die a little more. And life is too short, too precious, too brief to spend it being anyone other than yourself. So I'll end with this challenge. 1 week, one single week, practice radical authenticity. In small ways, what you actually think when asked your opinion. Choose what you actually want when given options. Admit when you're bored or disinterested. Instead of performing engagement, do one thing purely because you want to, not because it serves any purpose or goal. Notice how this feels. Notice what resist comes up. Notice who gets uncomfortable. Notice what you discover about yourself. Then come back here and comment. I practiced authenticity, because acknowledging that you're beginning this practice, that you're choosing yourself even in small ways, is the first step toward living a life that's actually see you on the other side of the performance.